Somehow, it has been 5 years since the pandemic, since COVID-19 shut things down in America. I distinctly remember a Friday afternoon, March 2020, slacking Katherine to say, this is coming. This is real. It is something that we are all going to have to respond to and deal with. And I think Katherine was kind of like, really, Peter? Really? And then a week later, the DC office shut down, and so did the rest of the world. So I want to go around the panel and ask, what is one thing we have learned or should have learned in the 5 years since the world went crazy? Matt, let's start with you.
I remember walking out of my house most every day, but frequently during the lockdown period of the pandemic here in Brooklyn, and walking down the basic commercial corridor where I live, commercial street, and it was of course empty, and feeling this just profound all of body despair that I was not expecting. I'm a little bit of a shy person and claustrophobic. I don't like crowds, generally speaking, but I learned that I need that bustle as the background of my life. I absolutely depend on it for human thriving, and I think part of the excessiveness of lockdowns in every single way, especially schools, but in other ways as well. We underrated how much that kind of contact with human beings mattered to us. And I think the compression of that was deranging in ways that we still have not yet come to grips with. There are a series of books and podcasts and things that are coming out this year about what happened in 2020. I think we'll be living with the repercussions for the rest of our lifetimes, really, of what going that unnaturally did to us in that period of time. And it still makes me just cringe and shudder thinking about it. I try not to, in fact.
Nick, what did you learn?
I wanted to bring up two things. One, on March 23rd, a couple days after New York did not issue technically a shelter-in-place law, but it was a lockdown, one of the more extreme ones in the country and one of the earlier ones. I wrote a piece for Reason that was titled, "We Will Regret Not Taking the Economic Effects of Mass Quarantine More Seriously." And I think that's pretty much right, and it's pretty accurate. And we have not fully understood the mechanisms by which we went into mass quarantine and what the effects have been. And I think we really need to study, why did this happen the way that it did? At the time it did, under Donald Trump, by the way. Donald Trump is the person who called for 15 days to flatten the curve. And I'm not saying, the Republicans are worse than the Democrats, because I live like Matt in New York City, and man, did the Democrats fuck up with every possible option, including in New York City and New York State, dictating what was and was not an essential business in a bizarre, weird way. Early on, liquor stores were shut down because they were non-essential businesses. That took about a day or two to fix. But for a large chunk of time, the only things that were open in New York City were pharmacies, supermarkets, and liquor stores. And that held on so much longer. And then people like Mario Cuomo or, Andrew Cuomo. Thank you. Yeah, Mario, they're all the same, right? They're like Entenmann's baked goods. They're just the same thing that gets slightly reconfigured. But Andrew Cuomo was dictating
Little Debbie Cakes Cuomo.
Yeah, what was and what was not a business that could open, including clothing stores. For a good chunk of time, the only place people in Lower Manhattan could shop was a Kmart, because it happened to sell food and had a pharmacy, and they didn't shut down, where you could go and buy like oversized thug clothing for a while. It was insane. And I think the last thing that I'll leave with, this was the thing that really destroyed all trust and confidence in government. I think, and we're living with that now. Over the weekend, I was talking to a couple of Gen Z guys I know, and they were describing being in college during the lockdown. My younger son was also in college, and the amount of anger and disappointment and just disorientation coming from understanding that government at all levels, local, state, and federal, did not care about you really, and also did not know what they were doing, but would not tell you that they did not know what they were doing, and just kind of pursue these endlessly stupid, incompetent programs. That is something that we will be living with for a very, very long time. And getting back that trust and confidence in government is really essential, I think, to limited government. But it is, we're barely getting started and even kind of addressing that.
Katherine, what lessons have you been living with for the last 5 years?
My lessons are about education. I think I am to this day making decisions about my kids' education that are deeply, deeply informed by how poorly the schools and especially the public teachers unions behaved during COVID. And never forget, this is like even now, parents broadly have the sense that schools learned during COVID that they could get away with a lot less school. They just don't provide as many days, hours of education. They don't provide them in ways that are thoughtful about parents. They never did, but it's gotten worse, or at least it didn't fully recover. The learning losses are real and they're spectacular. It's really, this is something that we are going to be dealing with for an entire generation. And I guess what I learned is to be extremely vigilant about the political risk posed by teachers unions and the public education monopoly.
I can vouch for the fact that the learning losses are real. I've felt them in my own self for years now. My lesson is that totalizing solutions don't work. Your big, ambitious plan for radically remaking society, it's going to fail. Doesn't mean that nothing will happen. Doesn't mean that you can't make big changes rapidly and demand that everyone upend their lives in crazy ways and do a lot of damage in the process. But you will not achieve the goals you set out to achieve. And in fact, you will probably set off a long backlash that will empower some of the worst tendencies, the tendencies you say you oppose. Doesn't mean you can never do anything. Doesn't mean that society can never change or progress. But social evolution has to come from the bottom up. Revolutions cannot be imposed from the top down.
That was a clip from the most recent Reason Roundtable podcast. To watch the full episode, click here. And to watch another clip, you can click over here. And remember to get the Reason Roundtable, subscribe to it wherever you get podcasts. Do it today. You'll be glad you did.